Hey folks, my name's Matt Horton. I am a musician and a product manager, and I recently left a singing group that I loved so that I could take a little artistic control over the things that I make. And this is one of the first takes at something like that, and you know what? Of course, when I'm ready to do this, this is the thing that happens. Really, I didn't think I'd be breaking down the financial dispute between a billion-dollar company and a trillion-dollar company. Love that. That said, I think that what's going on with Apple and games in general right now is important and interesting. Honestly, it's more interesting than it is frustrating, as frustrating it is as it is. And if you have no idea what I mean, then we're going to get into the history for you. So stop me if you've heard this one before. In 2007, Steve Jobs and Apple introduced the iPhone. We're not stopping there, I promise. We're going to move to the next year in March at the iPhone Software Roadmap event in 2008. This is where Apple announced the App Store. The App Store offered customers a place to download apps. The App Store offered developers a place to sell, distribute, market, and host their apps.
Pretty cool. And the App Store is going to be the exclusive way to distribute iPhone applications. Pick whatever price you want to sell your app at. When we sell the app through the App Store, the developer gets 70% of the revenues right off the top. We keep 30% to pay for running the App Store. There are no credit card fees for the developer. We take care of all that. There are no hosting fees for us hosting the app. We take care of all that. There's no marketing fees. The developer gets 70% of the revenues, and it's paid monthly. This is the best deal going to distribute applications to mobile platforms.
That 30% gets pretty contentious over the years, but at the time that it was announced, it was actually pretty radical. You see, there were two primary ways to get your software on a mobile device at the time: selling your software in a store and doing a deal with a manufacturer and a carrier to get your software installed on a device by default. These deals and selling in a store took far more than 30% of your revenue. Over time, as app business models changed and smartphones became more prevalent in the world, Apple was forced to change this a little bit. Now, if you subscribe to an app in the App Store for longer than 12 months, after 12 months, the developer gets 85% of that money instead of 70%, but only after the first year. For the first year, the developer still gets only 70%. Now, to get into the App Store, your app had to meet some guidelines. These were things like having good design, not being just a repackaged website, not having adult content like pornography. Later on, they'd introduce new rules like apps can't mine cryptocurrency, or enemies in a video game cannot be all of the same race, they can't be all of the same real government, all of the same culture, that kind of thing. These guidelines were meant to keep the store safe for users, but very quickly in the life of the App Store, some people saw them as a tool for Apple to maintain control in a way. Early on, there were some pretty ridiculous rejections of apps. As an example, the podcast app Castcatcher was rejected for excessive use of data. Excessive use of data is actually called out in the app guidelines, but the developer of Castcatcher felt that a podcast app necessitated that data use. Also, the original version of the Google Voice iPhone app was reportedly denied for replicating core functionality of the iPhone. Now, Apple says that the app was not denied. Google says it was denied for replicating dialer features, basically the phone app. AT&T got wrapped in there somewhere, but anyway, it's not quite clear, but it got worked out because Google Voice is on the iPhone now. A few years ago, a bunch of parental controls apps got banned, allegedly because they were taking too much data from the user. When you think about parental controls apps, of course they're going to be taking data from the user. They are parental controls apps. Now, this was around the time when Apple was expected to launch its screen time feature, which shows the user how they've been using their phone in a very detailed way. A lot of people saw this move as anti-competitive, and the uproar caused Apple to actually change their guidelines and allow these apps back in the store just a couple of weeks before their Worldwide Developers Conference in 2018, where they announced the screen time feature. This situation actually got brought up recently, just a few weeks ago, in the congressional antitrust hearing, including Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook.
But the timing of the removal seems Very coincidental.
One prominent example of this was Steam Link. That Steam, the video game store Steam. The Steam Link app streams the video from your video games on your PC to your phone and streams controls from your phone back to your PC on a local network. Apple originally rejected them because it was essentially just a remote desktop client, and so you saw the Steam interface and you could buy games. Apple does not let you use any payment system that is not their own in your apps on the App Store. And essentially they were saying Steam is letting you use Steam's payment system in an app that they've created on the App Store. We're not letting it in. Steam removed the store functionality, but it took a while to get the app into the App Store. It was never exactly clear what the holdup was, and eventually Apple did explicitly outline that Steam was allowed in its guidelines, and the app made it into the App Store. Very recently, just a week before WWDC 2020, the email app Hey was told that it could not issue an update to its app and that it should never have been approved because it did not offer a way to sign up for the service in the app. Essentially, if you didn't have an account, Hey's app was just a login screen. Hey lets you sign up for an account on their website. They did not allow signups on iOS. So if you downloaded the app and you didn't have an account, you couldn't log in. But if you had an account, the app worked fine. Apple said that the app needed to have minimal functionality, even if the user did not have a subscription. Either Hey needed to implement a subscription on iOS, or they needed to implement a free trial of sorts. Now you may be thinking, that's not how Netflix works. When I download Netflix, it's just a login screen. They don't let me sign up. And you'd be right. But Netflix is in a category that is in a list of what's called reader apps in the Apple App Store guidelines. What are reader apps? Magazines, newspapers, books, audio, music, video. But you also have professional databases, voice over IP, cloud storage, and approved services such as classroom management apps. Hey ended up getting into the App Store by implementing a free trial, and it's been smooth sailing ever since. But this story was super fresh when Microsoft and Xbox walked in the door. Now I know, we're going to talk about Fortnite, but first we have to talk about Xbox. Remember when we talked about Steam Link earlier and how you could stream games from your PC locally? Well, Xbox Game Pass streaming, or xCloud as it was known in development, is the same thing, except the PC that you're streaming from is an Xbox in a data center. That's it. That's the only difference. Honestly, being able to play Xbox games on my iPad would be super sick. Microsoft has been running a beta on Android and iOS for a while. On Android, you could play everything in the library. On iOS, you could only play Halo Master Chief Collection. Great game, but that's it. Well, the way that iOS betas work is through an app called TestFlight. And TestFlight has a review process, but it's just not as stringent as the App Store process, so you can kind of get away with some things there that you can't on the App Store, which is why I think they were able to get that at all. But why wouldn't they be allowed? Well, there's 3 guidelines that I think game streaming services like Xbox Game Pass streaming or Google Stadia, NVIDIA GeForce Now, or even Shadow, which is technically on the App Store now, break. The first is that remote desktop clients have to work over a local network. I don't actually know how Shadow gets past this one. They do market their service as a remote desktop app. It just works over the cloud. I'm not sure how they get past this one. Another very explicit rule says that in subscription game services, the app developer has to own or exclusively license all of the content. That means that Microsoft can't put indie developer content into its game streaming service unless it's exclusively licensed or Microsoft owns it. That's why you don't see NVIDIA GeForce Now or Google Stadia, because they sure don't own that content. Microsoft owns more of theirs, but they don't own it all. And one that's more interesting and that will get definitely brought up later when you hear Apple's response is enemies within the content of a game cannot be of a single race, culture, real government, corporation, or other real entity. And this points at Apple's desire to review games as content. Now, around March, Mark Gurman of Bloomberg reached out to Apple about Google Stadia and GeForce Now to figure out why they weren't in the App Store. And he got a very clear response from Apple. We want to review games individually, and we want them to show up in charts and in search on the App Store. So it was clear what was coming for those of us that pay attention. A couple weeks ago, Microsoft announced that they were rolling xCloud into Xbox Game Pass streaming. They also announced that that was only coming out on Android and that they were not moving forward with iOS. It took a couple days, but then they came out swinging with a statement against Apple. Our testing period for the Project xCloud preview app for iOS has expired. Unfortunately, we do not have a path to bring our vision for cloud gaming with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to gamers on iOS via the Apple App Store. Apple stands alone as the only general-purpose platform to deny consumers from cloud gaming and game subscription services like Xbox Game Pass, and it consistently treats gaming apps differently, applying more lenient rules to non-gaming apps, even when they include interactive content. All games available in the Xbox Game Pass catalog are rated for content by independent industry ratings bodies such as the ESRB and regional equivalents. We are committed to finding a path to bring cloud gaming with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to the iOS platform. We believe that the customer should be at the heart of the gaming experience, and gamers tell us they want to play, connect, and share anywhere, no matter where they are. We agree. You can hear in that statement a few things. Microsoft sees games as content, and Apple sees them as apps. They talk about how games are reviewed externally. Apple talks about wanting to review them on their own. Apple responded with their own statement, and it was almost a carbon copy of the statement they gave Mark Gurman in March. Our customers enjoy great apps and games from millions of developers, and gaming services can absolutely launch in the App Store, as long as they follow the same set of guidelines applicable to all developers, including submitting games individually for review and appearing in charts and search. In addition to the App Store, developers can choose to reach all iPhone and iPad users over the web through Safari and other browsers on the App Store. So why is Apple taking such a hard stance? Well, many are quick to point to Apple Arcade. It's a service from Apple that theoretically compares. If you don't know Apple Arcade, it's a $5 subscription. You can download a bunch of games from the App Store. They're actually really great games, honestly, and I actually super love the service. But every one of these App Store rules that these game streaming services breaks, those all existed before Apple Arcade was even thought of by Apple. So it can't be this like traditional anti-competitive move that people are looking for. Because honestly, as a fan of games and as a fan of product, like it sucks to watch this happen. Like this is Apple making their products worse because they want to stand their ground on something. And I'm not sure what that something is. Apple says it's because they want to review individual apps, but I don't think it's worth taking that idea seriously. Many people have brought up that it's a mistake to think of games as apps like Apple does, that games are actually content, just like TV shows and movies in the Netflix app are content. Apple doesn't review those individually. Actually, Rene Ritchie on his channel actually made this great point.
Immediately, everyone in their reblogger pointed out that Apple clearly doesn't review every movie or show in Netflix or song in Spotify. And Apple would probably respond that with very, very few Bandersnatchian exceptions, Netflix videos and Spotify audio aren't interactive and so don't require the same kind of review. But again, play and pause are interactions, and it's not like Netflix shows or Spotify songs are in the iTunes Store search system or charts either, though they can present themselves for Siri search and up next like Amazon Prime chooses to and Netflix assuredly does not.
But let's say that Apple really does believe this individual review thing. Why? Well, there's an argument out there that the world sees iPhone and iPad as general purpose computers, things that we should be able to do anything on. And Apple sees them as consoles, but app consoles. Similar to like the way that PS4 and Xbox are game consoles. And that we're comfortable with those being locked down. Why not iPhone? But despite the fact that that's just bonkers, I don't think it answers why. And honestly, I don't think we have a why right now. The anti-competitive argument doesn't work out. And honestly, the money argument doesn't work out because most games on Xbox Game Pass are not relying on microtransactions. And I'm sure that one of you is going to point out that I'm wrong in some way, and that's fine. Just leave a comment or tell me elsewhere. And lastly, Microsoft and Apple have a great relationship when it comes to Office 365. There is absolutely zero reason to believe that if Apple let them, that Microsoft would not offer a subscription using their payment service in the iOS app for Xbox Game Pass. I think Microsoft would happily take 70%. So to understand, I think we need to look at what happened with Fortnite. There's nothing I hate more than a billion-dollar company trying to aggravate its fans into making a trillion-dollar company do what it wants to. Here's what happened. Epic snuck a server-side update into the mobile version of Fortnite to add a second option for payment, next to the Apple Pay or Google Pay options. This is against the guidelines on both the App Store and Google Play. If you make an app on the App Store, you must use Apple's payment system. If you make a game on the Play Store, you must use Google Pay. Then, Epic announced permanent 20% discounts to any purchases in-game. They did this through in-game messages, social media posts, and emails to their players. This was poking the bear. A few hours later, and honestly later than I think a bunch of us expected, Apple banned Fortnite from the App Store. And actually, if you don't know, Google followed up pretty quickly after. Then, Epic released an ad that second for second, shot for shot, mimicked the 1984 Super Bowl ad from Apple.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contribution.
Today, we celebrate the anniversary of the platform unification directives. For years, they have given us their songs, their labor, their dreams. In exchange, we have taken our tribute, our profits, our control. This power is ours and ours alone. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Oh my god, that last line, I hate it so much. This is not the worst thing about 2021 in the world. And free Fortnite? No, you did this to yourself. Oh my god. It's great marketing, but you did this to yourself. Okay. Whew. Epically immediately filed lawsuits for both Apple and Google, and the internet lost its mind and completely ignored the US president sabotaging the US Postal Service because he doesn't want to lose an election. So, what's up? Why does this fight exist? Why is Apple going so hard here? Well, first off, this is probably not step one. This is likely the outcome of negotiations breaking down. We saw in antitrust hearings that Apple's willing to cut a deal. Remember how I said that subscriptions that are longer than a year go down to a 15% cut for Apple? Well, Amazon on Prime Video has been getting that 15% cut from day one since 2017 because and Jeff Bezos had lunch together and cut a deal. So we know these deals happen. The talks just probably broke down. And to understand why the talks broke down and why Apple's taking such a hard stance, you need to know a little bit about how Apple makes money. The smartphone market is saturated, and that's just a fancy way of saying people aren't buying smartphones anymore. Everyone has them. People are keeping them for longer, and that's fine. But that's not fine for Apple shareholders. So instead of growing the smartphone market, Apple has shifted to growing its services business. This is why you've seen Apple launch things like Apple TV Plus, Apple News Plus, Apple Card, and Apple Arcade, which we talked about earlier. It's also why Apple Music comes free with everything. But the overwhelming majority of Apple's services revenue, from the beginning of the App Store until now, comes from app sales and in-app purchases. And you know what category of apps makes up most of that money? It's games. We can't say that for absolute sure. Apple's never said it out loud. But from what we know about the industry, it's probably games. And that tracks with the way that Google does things too. Remember, games is the only category on the Play Store where you're required to use their payment services. Honestly, in the mobile world, I don't think Fortnite is one of the biggest, but I think it's probably substantial. Epic has Apple in a position right now where even if Apple wins the lawsuit, they should still be nervous. Apple's not in control of the situation, especially from a PR perspective. Apple has threatened to cut Epic off from developer tools entirely, and that means that things like the Unreal Engine will get cut off from all of Apple's platforms, including the Mac. We're not exactly clear what that could mean, but if the Unreal Engine doesn't run on the Mac anymore, that's holding large parts of the gaming industry hostage for this spat. That's bad PR for Apple, and I don't think they realize that. But when I look at the xCloud debacle and at this Epic showdown, the only thing that I can see is a desire for control from Apple. Apple controls every aspect of their products. The design, the packaging, the marketing, the launch, the software availability, and all of it impeccably tightly, whether you like that or not. As a product manager, honestly, sometimes it makes me jealous. But with games, they lost control a long time ago. You might not remember this, but Steve Jobs was actually the person that announced Halo Combat Evolved right before Microsoft bought it. And you can see just how well that worked for them. Here's a couple other things you might not remember that Apple tried. But when the iPhone arrived, I think Apple knew that it was going to be great for gaming. They probably felt like they'd figured it out finally. In fact, there were a few marketing campaigns for the early iPod Touch that were entirely about mobile gaming. But with mobile gaming came something really gross. Shady sales tactics and gambling adjacent microtransactions and loot boxes. Something Epic built their fortune on. We know all about how games steal money from kids, how whales who spend exponentially more money than the average player support entire businesses. We've heard all those stories before. But because of those tactics, Apple was raking in money for games. But honestly, I really don't think that they were happy with how it was happening. Because in 2019, Apple announced Apple Arcade.
We really think you're going to love Apple Arcade, a game subscription service unlike any other. You'll enjoy over 100 amazing new and exclusive games, and more games will be added all the time.
And if you didn't catch that, it was positioned explicitly against microtransactions. Apple Arcade got a tab in the App Store. It had some incredible games, some of my favorite games actually, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Grindstone, Where Cards Fall, Oceanhorn 2, The Bradwell Conspiracy. They were taking back control. But then Apple Arcade slowed down. New games didn't come as frequently. There were reports that they'd changed strategy. And as that happened, Google Stadia launched and floundered. Fortnite continued to grow, despite everyone saying it's dead all the time. And Xbox Game Pass rose in popularity. Also, Nvidia completely backed out of the minuscule Mac support that they had left, and Apple continued to lose control of games. We hit this news, and the only option I think that Apple thinks they had is, even in the face of serious antitrust action from the US and EU, was to stand their ground. Unfortunately, I think that the most likely outcome is that Apple and Google win their lawsuits from Epic, but that the US or the EU introduces some regulation to introduce sanity back into digital marketplaces. I think that's probably the right move, but it's the kind of thing that only happens when things have gone completely out of control.
Why can't we be friends? If it's so much easier before we got our feelings hurt, and I can't pretend that it's easy. Why can't we be friends? I used to be so close to you. What's somebody supposed to do now? 'Cause I can't pretend that it's easy. Why can't we be friends?
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like the video, please subscribe, and share it with anyone that you think might enjoy it as well. I will see y'all next time.
I miss those days. God, I miss those times. Then something changed, it got weird and we don't know why. We can't talk about what we're thinking now. All I really wanna do is hang